Rahul, hi, good to have you with us. How have you been?
I've been well, Ashu. Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Rahul, this is an interesting conversation, right? Because of course, one, you're in fintech, right? And that's something which is
Hmm.
personally very close to my heart.
Hmm.
And second, you're doing it for women, right? Which has been a category which has been extremely underserved, right?
Hmm.
And while there'll be many, many conversations, right, around empowerment, I think capital-led support is something which is very critical, right? And especially in a developing country like India, this is an ecosystem which is very, very important. I mean, and we've seen the success across entrepreneurs, microfinance, right? And the way that entire, retention cohort has kind of worked out, right? But doing that in urban areas, urban setting, I think is just so much more important, right? And I think, and here you are, right? You're kind of solving for the challenge. Thus, it becomes an interesting and important conversation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it goes beyond economics and business to culture, right?
Right.
Forget about previous generations. Even now, the belief is that within a family,
Right.
boys should be involved in finance, and that's not the domain
Right.
of girls. And this has serious implications. I mean, despite the laws in the books, on the books, we see today, and even in Delhi, inheritance going primarily to male children and not female. So this kind of cultural bias has very drastic consequences for women in their future.
Right. Very interesting. Rahul, before we start to discuss Florence Capital and your motivation to sort of set it up, right, and the kind of
Mhm.
impact it's creating, I think
Yeah.
it'll be lovely if you could take us through quick background, quick round of introduction. I think will be very helpful to start our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in India, but I moved to the US when I was just a year
Right.
old. So this was in 1990, and it was kind of interesting because it's right, a year before India started
Right.
reforming and opening up. So growing up, my parents had a very different conception of India, that it's stifled by bureaucratic red tape.
Right.
So I completely grew up in the US. I met my co-founder at Princeton. We had a bunch of wild ideas. We would
Right.
spend evening discussing entrepreneurial ventures down the road. We never thought we would start them so soon. And then after graduating, we kind of used our limited savings and traveled around. We went to Brazil, we went to
Right.
Europe, Turkey, China, and then came to India as well. And this was around 2012, 13. And there was so much energy here,
Right.
you know. I visited India over summers, back and forth every 3 years or so. But what I saw was very different from the conception of India my
Right.
parents may have had
Right.
leaving in 1990. So I went through this summer of soul searching. I thought it was a very exciting place
Right.
to be. And I remember telling my parents, you know what, I'm going to drop everything and move to India. That's where the future is. And they were not pleased, let's say. They're like, can you please
Right.
get an MBA? Like a good boy, you were always nice. Sida bacha, what have we done
Right.
to deserve this? So initially it was, and this was a question I got almost all the time when I came
Right.
back. When I came to India, why are you here? And that too, my family lives in Silicon Valley. It's like we left everything to come here. Why do you want to go back? But I think it was personally the best decision of my professional life. So my co-founder Poshak and I started one company in education that's thriving now. And then we said, how do we create even more impact? We explored educational finance. We went out and just spoke with hundreds of people.
Right.
And it was through those conversations, the idea for Florence emerged.
Very
So
interesting.
that's, yeah.
Very interesting. Rahul, you're doing it for women, right? And like I said, right at the outset, that makes it a very, very interesting conversation, right? But when you look at India, right? I mean, India has largely been a very underserved market when it comes to formal credit, right? And we've largely been dependent on a very private credit-led market, right? In many ways, right? I think there are many startups which have essentially come into this space, right? Who are now solving it across the board, right? I mean, there are many people who are doing payday loans. There are many people who are doing, for example, short-term loans, right? There are fintech companies that are coming up to kind of say, for example, tracking the home loan market, right? So there are many people, right? So it's a wide space in that sense, right? I mean, you chose to go after a women-focused market, right? Or basically lending in that particular category, right? I mean, tell me a little more about that. I mean, how did that come to fore, right? I mean, what was the thesis behind doing, cutting it in a different way, right? Was it to essentially create a unique identity for yourself, or was there more to it, right? Because this is a category which has clearly been far more underserved, right? And there have been nuances around, right? What led into creating Florence Capital? I mean, what brought them the focus?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this gets to one of our core ideologies, which is we got to get out of the office and we got to talk to users as much as possible. So initially, we were focused on a more general market, and we were asking potential users about their entire credit journey and really trying to understand those pain points. And some of the pain points were common, right? Number one, things were slow, right? You gotta drive to the bank, you gotta wait in a long line, you gotta fill out longer forms. Then, someone will visit your home and or office a few days later, ask you a bunch of personal questions. It can be rather intrusive, then it takes a few more days, if at all. So women in particular were very hesitant to go through this process. And this word kept popping out. I remember our having numerous discussions and everyone was using this word jhanjat, pardon my Hindi, but jhanjat, like it's just a hassle. And then we just got this insight that, fintech lending is to traditional banking what e-commerce is to traditional retail.
Right.
Although traditional retail can be fun on a weekend, traditional banking is not that fun. Right. So especially with issues related to women's security, we found that this was a big pain point. So we had discussions and we said, like, look, this is where we can really create impact. Of course, we can create a general product, but we have so many, almost half of our team is women, almost half of our department heads are women. So we took this call and we haven't looked back since.
Very interesting. Yeah, Rahul, tell me this, right? So, I mean, at a product level, how do you cut it, right? I mean, for example, underwriting is something which is very core and critical to the entire, lending mechanism, right? And especially when you're doing it in a fintech environment, it's all the more rigorous, right? It has to be far more dynamic, right? Because essentially lending on somebody else's behalf, right?
Correct.
In this case, how does your, for example, credit assessment change, right? I'm given you doing it for women, right? I mean, are there additional parameters that you factor into the risk assessment mechanism? Is that unique to you, or are you essentially following something which, say, largely a lot of other fintechs are kind of using, right? Which is combination of very visible and some behavioral aspects, right? Is there a difference in the model?
Got it. First of all, we have to realize that about 75% of Indians don't have credit scores, right? They have no financial history. So in addition to speed and convenience, one of our big pushes is inclusion. So how do we make our product more accessible to an NTC customer? Right. And the only way we can do that is by adopting what we call smart credit, a more holistic model of underwriting. So kind of our mantra is ability to earn is ability to pay or repay. All right. So we look at additional variables regarding professional status, skill, and so on. And we want to be as inclusive as possible. So I think that has been the push of the credit and data science teams. look, if we're only going to limit ourselves to traditional credit parameters, we're not going to be able to disrupt the market in the way we envision.
Very interesting. Well, what so in an environment like that, right? I mean, what's your customer set, right? I mean, are you catering to the urban, upwardly mobile women, right? Who are educated, who have who are either running their own business, right, or have a are essentially professionals, right? I mean, are you into funding those women, or are you taking and you spoke of inclusion, right? Or are you essentially looking at women, who are not possibly say educated right to that level, right, are possibly running part of the cottage industry, right, they're running some or the other shop, uh, they could potentially be B2B suppliers, right, and not necessarily part of the formal credit ecosystem. Is that the category that you're catering to, or is this a more like I said, right, upwardly mobile category that you're kind of focusing on, because there are visible factors, right? I mean, you at the end of the day have to manage delinquencies as well, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So regarding who is the Florence customer, I can share with you actual stories. We've got this. So generally, we like to say young professional urban women. We're starting there. We initially thought that this would be a personal loan product, and then we saw that a lot of young women were taking loans for small businesses. There are a lot of boutique owners who were particularly hard hit during COVID, so it connects to that as well. They needed assistance in bringing their business online. How do they do social media marketing? How do they use how do they analyze their customer base? So we created programs for them, and this gets to kind of our community building efforts. But in a nutshell, some boutique owners who want to kind of expand their supply and customer base. We had a young woman who was starting who already had a tuition center in her basement, and she wanted to purchase supplies, and hire a couple more teachers. So that's where we're beginning right now. We would love to, we will certainly expand to other segments with time. But right now it's young, professional, urban women who are, looking to expand their businesses, upskill, and grow professionally and personally.
Very interesting. Rahul, if you could share something around the current numbers, right? Which are the markets that you are currently active in? How many women have you? Women entrepreneurs, right? If I can put it that way, right? I mean, have you served in the recent times, right? I mean, what stage of the business are you in from a deployment standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. I can say that we dispersed our first loan in January, and we were quite excited about that. And we've experienced a 30-35% month-on-month increase over the past few months. So we want this to continue, and I'll have more numbers for you very soon.
Interesting. But and Rahul, is there a choice of market that you have, right? I mean, are you operating in urban markets? Are you operating in semi-urban markets? I mean, what's your where do you stand on that front?
Yes, absolutely. Right now, big metro areas, Delhi, Mumbai, we're getting applicants from other cities as well, but primarily urban markets for now.
Interesting. Rahul, one that there is, I mean, there are many fintechs that have come up, right? And lending is been the space where we've seen actually the most, innovation, right, and influx of founder startups, right? And essentially everybody's trying to channelize this required capital at the fastest, right? Now, given with what you're dealing with, right, I mean there are women who are doing some sort of a business, right, or want to sort of say expand or whatever, right? You're essentially just coming in and sort of said that filling in that gap, right? How competitive is the space become, right? Because at the end of the day, irrespective of who the individual is, right, I mean, at the end of the day, all companies struggle with deployment pressures, right? It's a file, it's a case at the end of the day, right? That everybody wants to acquire. How competitive is that becoming, right? Is that from a customer standpoint, right? I mean, is there a certain affinity that you've been able to build with the brand, right? That here is a brand which thinks of me as a founder, right? Which brings in, say, not just the capital, but say a bunch of other things, right? Which help me do my business better. Is there some sort of alignment that you have on that front? I mean, is there some sort of an affinity or a community that you've been able to create around the brand, or essentially, you compete in the same market like anybody else, which is in the lending space?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I would say on that is our customer service and collections field teams are all women. So I think that is a differentiator. Again, going back to our market research, we discovered that that this was a challenge and this was a shortcoming of many existing players. So from the get-go, from day one, we were committed to ensuring the dignity of all of our customers, right? Come what may. So I think this has been a big push, and we have successfully implemented that. In addition, as you mentioned, I think we hold true to our vision that this is about helping women get independent and empowered through financial literacy and through capital. But that requires this overlay of community building. That's why for every one of our customers, we have this professional development plan. We like to say in the team, we have like an in-house McKinsey for SME, for SME borrowers. What exactly do they need? We kind of diagnose the problem and we kind of put them into various buckets, and we actually give them a professional development plan, whether it's, how do you take your business online? How do you do branding, marketing, sales better? How do you use analytics, simple platforms? How do you differentiate your product? So I think that professional development and community building is really critical to our vision and to our growth. And it's something that really we're really interested in. Our first company was in education. So both Poshak and I, we're educators at heart. We love to see people grow. We love to see people develop, upskill, do what they haven't been able to do before. So I think that's there. And then if you look on our social media pages, we're always putting out relevant content, whether it's on health. And, we're taking up topics that that young women may not always have access to, whether it's regarding menstrual health, regarding law, for anything from cyberbullying to sexual harassment to even domestic violence. What recourses do you have? What are the laws in the books, and what are steps you can take to address these issues? So in addition to our core product, we are thinking about, what are all these social issues that women are facing today? How can we provide them with those resources, bringing in, we call them Florence stars, professionals in these various domains who can give quality advice. So I would say this: one, the all women customer service and collections field agents, the community building efforts, and the very relevant content. That has been one of the thrusts of our growth efforts.
Very interesting. Rahul, I particularly like the health piece that you kind of mentioned, right? And I think that's extremely important, especially in case of women, right? And of course, I kind of completely agree with the entire empowerment, play, right? And the ecosystem that you're creating around it, right? And I think that's just so much more important, right? Because, men are exposed in business at a very different level. I mean, the risk-taking ability, culturally, we've been sort of nurtured in a way where, the risk-taking ability is essentially around 1%, right? And I think, in women, given that they're in a credit ecosystem, they might not necessarily have that flexibility, but it becomes important to give them that support, right? Structure. But I'm going to take a step back, right? And I'm essentially going to talk to you a little more about the product, right? Within the health fintech that you highlighted, right? And this is something which has just been classically discussed internally, not in many other conversations, right? So, for example, women in leadership positions, women in, for example, specifically around credit product, right? The biggest of all challenges has been health concerns, right? Is when they get married, they could be, they could get into a family, which essentially meant that there was, and the whole question was around the seriousness of their commitment, right? And priorities at that point in time, right? Now, when you are out there to lend, does that exposes you to a very different kind of a risk, right? Because at the end of the day, like I said, you're a fintech. Right? It's very important for you to maintain the health of your books, right? Uh, while of course you can be talking about many of these things, awareness is very important. But do you really have the scope and margin, or what level of scope or margin do you have to adjust to aberrations that could possibly people in your portfolio be exposed to?
Hmm. Okay. So I think, let me get your question. You're saying women have various, various family obligations, and therefore does that is that a factor when we're making credit? Am I getting
I'm saying,
the
so
question
basically,
right? Yeah.
okay, we'll edit this piece out, right? But what I'm
Yeah.
saying is basically that, they could have their health issues, right? I mean, this is not something which has been talked about, but around health issues, for example, pregnancy, right? Their
Mm.
seriousness around their entire ability to deliver consistently, I think, has been questioned, right? And that is the reason, while many people have been talked about, many people have talked about empowerment, right? There are very few products that have necessarily come out which are focused towards women, right? And largely because of that reason. It's been said and looked at in a way where, they cannot do it without men, right? Now what happens is, and this is a natural process, right? They're going to go through, they get married, they're going to have kids, right? They're going to come into a family way, which essentially means that they might not be very focused on their business, right? That would lead into a delinquency of loan, right? Which is essentially what you are kind of doing. Do you have margins there, right? I mean, what is your banking relationship? I think you can answer it possibly in that sense.
Okay. All right. No, see, not I think this is kind of the mindset that we hope to change, that
Right.
women don't have to choose between. I'm not denying that there are challenges, but that's
Right.
why the community building efforts, that's why speaking with users, really understanding what those challenges
Sure.
are critical. And in terms of professional development, how can we help SMEs get to that level of maturity that perhaps they don't involve they don't require the day-to-day operational oversight of the female founder, and she can balance multiple obligations. So there are no easy answers to this, but what I'm convinced of is that we can find those solutions, and that's going to be a challenge to us, and one that we will definitely rise up to.
No, and I think I kind of understand where you're coming from, Rahul. And I think the good part is that I think country as a whole is getting institutionalized, right, in many
Mm.
forms and ways, right? And I
Yeah.
think the kind of business ecosystem that we were possibly in just about a few years back, I think we're in a very different ecosystem, right, of business. I think
Right.
it's a more trackable, traceable, predictable business ecosystem that we are now getting into, right? And I
Yeah.
think clearly, if you institutionalize it right, irrespective of how large or small business you are, right? And I completely agree with what you're saying, right? I mean, women can clearly manage both the pieces, and I think they have that God's gift, right, in terms of being able to do many tasks at the same time, right? And I think the time is possibly right, and I understand where you're coming from, and I think that community play becomes very important,
Yeah.
right? Because then in that case they are at least able to understand the nuances of those issues much early on. Uh, Rahul, what's the current model, right, at Florence, right? I mean, are you co-lending right now? What's your arrangement with your, the many NBFCs that you work with, many banking partners that you work with, right? What's your arrangement? And are you lending off your books? Are you lending off your partners' books, right? What's the current structure of operation?
Yeah. We do have an NBFC partner who is working with us right
Sure.
now. So we have a fantastic relationship there.
Mhm.
We, we have frequent discussions about our policies, and we ensure
Sure.
that that we're on the same page there. But we
Right.
are entirely focused on the credit underwriting, and the customer service and collections, the ethical customer service and collections, and then we have our NBFC partner who is lending on the books.
Very interesting. Yeah, Rahul, it's like I said, right? There are many fintech players who are out there in the market, right? Everybody is essentially chasing the same customer, right?
Mhm.
Where what is essentially happening is, a CAC to LTV ratio is kind of really going for a toss, right? Everybody is spending a higher dollar to acquire that same customer, right? And the customer is spoiled for choice, right? In terms of who does he or she takes credit from, right? Is there a difference? I mean, have you been able to sort of manage in a different way, right? I mean, or have you been able to sort of manage your costs of acquisition in a different way, right? Given there is a community, right, the possibilities of virality in that can be built into your acquisition, right? Have you been able to sort of build those structures in the process which help you get acquire a new customer at a better cost? Or you're essentially following the same mechanics, right? Which are essentially say digital in means and ways, right, for discovery.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the key to keeping customer acquisition costs low are organic users. So
Right.
although this wasn't our primary motivation for building the community, what that's led to is right now 30 to 35% of our customers come organically,
Mhm.
as opposed to ad-based. So I think we need to double down on that for multiple reasons,
Mhm.
primarily to, it's not just about providing capital, but how can you use that capital to get to that next level,
Right.
however you define it. So I think that is going to be critical. And I'm sorry, the second part of your question was? So yeah, how do we keep CAC low?
Right.
So I think that is going to be the key. It's naturally going down as we understand our customer
Right.
segment better as well. Again, there's a lot of interaction between the data science, credit, and growth teams as to who is our customer. Again, we're not stopping, going out, having discussions, taking feedback. We're engaging with them through these community building efforts. So I think that is good business as well as a good differentiator, and something that other companies aren't focusing on to the same extent.
Very interesting. Rahul, I'm going to talk a little about competitive. I mean, you kind of walked me into my next question, right? And I think competitive environment is very important, right? I mean, there are many pay later products that have come up. There are many first, SME focused products and business focused products that have come up, right? Especially in the lending space, right? And of course, traditional agencies are kind of also waking up, right? And they want to sort of empower women, right, who want to start out and so on and so forth, right? How does the competitive landscape look like, right? Are there players who stand an advantage, or how do you, for example, how do you differentiate yourself with them, right? I mean, of course, thematically saying that you're more focused on women, there is a certain infrastructure that you've created which is very women centric, right? By bringing in women to sort of do certain very critical tasks in the process, right? But within that competitive zone, right? I mean, how one, what is that competitive zone, right? And second, how do you really differentiate yourself in that zone?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are multiple ways. Everyone's going for speed and
Sure.
convenience, as are
Right.
we. We brought this
Right.
process down to, I mean, the approval happens within a few hours, 3 to 4
Sure.
hours, right? And we're trying to bring that down even more, streamline the process, expedite the process, make it as
Mhm.
easy as possible. The only documents we require are those that are mandated by RBI guidelines, nothing
Right.
more. So I think, how do we make this as simple as possible? That's number one. Number two is in the credit underwriting. I think the differentiation lies in, how can we think more creatively about who
Right.
will be an amazing customer and community member, even if they
Right.
don't have a financial history. So that inclusion angle comes in, and I think that's one thing we're really pushing on, as
Mhm.
well as kind of the education, professional development, and empowerment that we want to secure, and really putting resources behind that. And then finally, kind of not just paying lip service to being women friendly, but really going out of the way. Kind of, our people and culture team is goes out and finds phenomenal customer service and collection agents who are really trained in not only what they're supposed to do, but in the highest customer service standards and collection standards, and ensuring that they embody and imbibe the values that we wish to inculcate. So I would say, like, there's the speed and convenience, which differentiates fintechs from banks. We want to do that even more, bring down the turnaround time at every point along the journey, make the journey as seamless and delightful as possible in the credit underwriting, the smart credit, the more holistic
Right.
Variables which promote greater inclusion, then as well then the educational and community building efforts,
Right.
and then kind of this single-minded devotion to making this user journey comfortable for women.
Right. Interesting. Rahul, when we talk of lending, right? I mean, one big, very, very large problem is recovery, right? And I think everybody kind of continues to grapple with that, right? I think each lending institution, especially in a post-COVID environment, right, is kind of grappling with this entire problem, right? I mean, are you seeing very different trends in when you're lending to women? Are you seeing a very different trend? Because microfinance, for example, right, has been massively successful in India, largely because a very large percentage of women were essentially brought into that circuit, right? And the accountability and trust ecosystem that got created, the accountability that got created was very, very different, right? And I think that's something which has been discussed not just in India, but I think that's a case study across many universities as well, right? How difficult is recovery? I mean, are you using certain techniques that have say been experienced by microfinance institutions, right? Does the community help you in the process, right? Or are you seeing similar trends, right? Or these are just too early days for you, right, to make a comment? And I understand that could be a possibility, right? Because India is a fairly diverse market in that sense, right? But what's your sense of on the recovery side?
Yeah, I think we focus more on smart underwriting. So I think because we have put so much thought there, that makes recovery rather seamless. Our default rates as of now on all the loans so far, the hundreds we've dispersed are 1%. So we were surprised about that, and I think
Right.
that's a testament to the strength of the underwriting process and how we're finding really great borrowers. So I think that's the name of the game with any lending platform. But I think the trust we strive to develop, and it's real, like really like treating people differently. Hey, we are your partners in your professional growth, right? We want to help during this critical time. We've got this community, we've got educational materials, we've got content that you can benefit from. And if you want to follow up on that, we're here for you. I think that plays a huge role in the sustainability of our business,
Right.
model. Yeah.
Now tell me something, right? So a slightly more casual question, right? I mean, between the two of you, the founders, right? You both men, right? Has there something which has been questioned, right? I mean, or have you felt it, as a challenge internally that we're not, we need to have a woman co-founder, right? Or we need to build that capacity at a founding level, right? To essentially, possibly say communicate better, right? Because I mean, the conversation between two women is very different from what it is, right? Between, you know, uh, do you think it's an important step, or have you been able to sort of navigate your
Definitely.
way?
I mean, it definitely is. That's why, we have, I mean, almost half of our department heads are women. We
Right.
put together an all-women advisory board. And then kind of going back to the culture of our organization. I
Right.
guarantee you, if a fresher joins tomorrow, straight out
Uh-huh.
of LSR, a 21-year-old, she will have as much say in questioning the company's decisions and policies as anyone else. So I think, of course, we need women leadership, which we've cultivated, an advisory board, which is in place and helps us with strategic decision making,
Sure.
but also kind of the general timbre of the organization kind of brings these voices to the fore. So that's
Right.
something both my co-founder and I, Poshak and I, have been insistent on. We like to say what is right is always more important than who is
Right.
right. Who is right is inconsequential.
Right.
So how do we create that space where the right decisions come to the fore and are implemented? And I think we've been doing a good job of that. We can't rest on our laurels, and we have to keep that culture going moving forward.
Very interesting. Well, COVID has been a very, very kind of, critical, pivotal event, right? I think in each one of our lives, right? And it's touched us at a personal level, it's touched us at a professional level as well, right? And I think it's gotten a very different kind of a, I think predominantly it's done two things, right? One, of course, it's brought in a very different kind of risk in the ecosystem.
Mhm.
That's number one. Number two, what it's also done is that it's increased the exposure of the customer, right? Especially in the urban market, right? And typically, what is happening is that this environment that we are in, right, is exposing our businesses to a very different kind of risk, right? A very dynamic consumption environment, right, which is not necessarily going to be as predictable as possibly it was, right? Because we had our own, we had our own ways to sort of consume, right? There were own dichotomies that existed, right? There were gaps that existed in the consumption pattern, right? And that essentially meant that a product will fly for a much longer time, right?
Mhm.
In a D2C environment, right, which is essentially now what we're seeing pick up, right, which is direct to consumer, it's going to get into a very, very dynamic environment, right? You're going to have fads fly, right? That I like to put it that way, right? Which essentially means that you might have a product which a business owner is putting capital in, and they're building, which might just last for just for 8, 9, 10 months, 11 months, right? And that entire capacity could possibly go for a toss, right? And there could be a new product that will come up, right? What I'm essentially trying to sort of say is that there's going to be a huge risk when it comes to execution of businesses, right? And then that essentially means that it'll create a very different kind of a risk for the portfolios, right, of fintechs, lending institutions, banks, all of that, right? Uh, do you think that's a real fear? Are you seeing some trends around that already? How are you trying to sort of, is there a strategy that you have around this very dynamic, ecosystem or landscape that we've already entered in a certain format way? It's going to become far more sharper as we go along, right?
Mhm.
What are the thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think this is all the more reason for our kind of holistic smart credit process. We're always running
Mhm.
experiments, different mini portfolios and so on. So absolutely.
Right.
We need to take we're really happy with our risk assessment. We got to take it to the next level. And to buffer against future shocks, we're always exploring. And I think that's how we came across many of these variables, right? One of our mantras is, ability to earn, it's ability to pay,
Mhm.
right? And we have many other little insights that have been garnered through endless hours of data science mining. So, so that's what we got to do. We got to stay flexible.
Mhm.
We got to have different hypotheses, different mini portfolios, test test them out, and then double down on what's working. So I think that's our response to the inevitable risks that will emerge in the future.
Interesting. I would have loved to dig you further, on the risk this thing, right? But I'm going to possibly say that for our next conversation, right? I think that in itself is that's an independent topic, right? And we can possibly have an hour-long conversation just on that, right? But like I said, I'm going to save it for the next time, right? Rahul, there is a huge narrative which is kind of being discussed, right? Which is being debated around Bharat, right, as a possibility. When I say Bharat is essentially everything minus the urban part of the country, right? Which is typically
Mhm.
tier cities, right? Tier B cities. What's your sense of it, right? I mean, there are many women entrepreneurs that are there, which are in tier 3, tier 4 cities, right? And like I said, right, I mean, microfinance is kind of thrived largely on very hyper local environments, right? And women entrepreneurs, right, who were either working for cooperatives, who work with cottages, cottage industry, who are part of cottage industry, so on and so forth, right? Um, would we see a Florence venture into that area? I mean, is that? I mean, I know what you're kind of catering to is large in itself, right? It's fairly large in itself. But is there an aspiration to be catering to women in the hinterlands, right? In Bharat, for example, is that an area of priority?
100%, and I think we're going to look into that in the timeline of 1 to 2 years. Going back to the personal story, when Poshik and I were traveling around
Right.
the world, our primary discussions were on economic development.
Hmm.
Not from kind of a policy standpoint, but what actually drives economic development.
Right.
from the ground up. And kind of we connected this to, like for social development, for intellectual development, economic development is the precursor to that. And with 70% of India non-urban, if to stay true to that vision, to move in that direction, we have to move from urban areas to second tier cities, to third tier, to fourth tier, to non-urban areas as well. So that is, we look forward to that. Going back to your previous question, there are going to be risks, but we can overcome those. Thankfully, the policy framework in India is very pro fintech. There are definitely safeguards in place, for example, to prevent abuses from payday lending and so on. But largely, I think the policy infrastructure has been favorable. So we look forward to riding that wave, and yes, expanding the segments. And again, we're always running these experiments and talking to customers, really understanding. I mean, the challenges faced by young women in rural India will be very different. So how do we develop that expertise? How do we develop that authenticity? You'll definitely see that from us in the coming couple of years.
Very interesting. Rahul, a very important question, right? Which was the end of the conversation. A very important question, right? Is around policy, right? And I think when we talk of policy, and you kind of alluded to it, right? In a certain way, right? But I essentially want to understand, right? I mean, if, for example, something that we refer to, there's a huge conversation which is happening around empowerment, right? So there's a huge conversation which is happening around, ensuring that women are independent, right, and financially independent, right? They have access to many other things. They can make those choices for themselves, stuff like that. And financial availability becomes very critical in that aspect, right? Do you think there is a need for policies that are specifically carved out for women, right? Who are wanting to venture out. They should sort of be incentivized in a certain form and way, right? There could possibly be some relaxation, which would be around, say, the interest rate, right? Payments, and many others, right? Well, of course, there are a lot of things that you're doing in your current structure already, right? But do you think this has to be more formalized, right? Institutionalized. This has to be done at a policy level, right, by the government, so that the sensitivity around the space becomes much sharper, and which helps or paves way for players like yourself, who are focused on ensuring that the community does well, to operate faster and improve their longevity in the entire thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are very complex issues, and I'm sure a lot of policymakers are working on it. Absolutely, we would love to work, and we've already started to work with a diverse array of players in this space. Whether it's NGO partners who join us for talks like this one. We're tracking kind of the policy infrastructure in India, really understanding where it's going. And absolutely, I think the mark of a great government is how it treats and cultivates communities that have historically not received their fair share. And there are many of those in India. And I think there are challenges we need to overcome, but I think there's a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of interest to solve those problems. This, I think, is the kind of energy and zeitgeist that attracted me to India in the first place.
Right.
So yeah, they're challenging questions that require a lot of thought, and we will certainly be part of those discussions.
Interesting. Rahul, what are the next 2 years like, right, Florence? I think a very interesting market, right? India is by far the most interesting market in the world right now. Right. I think the consumption appetites are peaking, right? I think exposures have grown exponentially, right, in the last 1.5 years. I mean, we always had that aspiration, right? So I think it's really coming together in many forms and ways, right? What are the next 2 years like? And I think more so for women, right? I think with education levels increasing, they understanding their rights, empowerment being talked about, right? Very exciting system ecosystem, right? what are the next 2 years like for Florence, right? I mean, what are your personal, as founders, right, as promoters, what are your personal targets, right, in the next 2 years? What are you set to achieve?
Yeah, definitely. See, we want Florence to become a household name for all things related to financial literacy, financial empowerment, social empowerment.
Right.
So I think kind of doubling down and kind of entrenching ourselves, like we're really putting our money and our energy where our mouth is, not just with our core lending product, but with kind of an assortment of value-added content and services. And kind of spreading our wings, working with various community partners, and of course, kind of growing the business, getting to Series A. But that will only happen if we focus on our fundamentals. We're focusing on smart credit, really being responsible with our underwriting. At the same time, you can't be too conservative. You gotta run experiments, and I think that's been one of the keys to our success, looking at different variables. So striking that perfect balance between kind of responsibility and experimentation. So I think we have been very thoughtful, and I think one of the cornerstones of our culture is that our company culture is that we blend these opposites, right? You go too much on one end and you get into trouble. So I think if we do that, we will see the growth we're looking for, sustainable growth, and then kind of keeping that vision alive and really being true to it, really being authentic about it. That's what we're about here, and we intend for that to continue.
Phenomenal. Rahul, any word of advice, right, that you'll have for many, many women entrepreneurs, right, who are out there? And I would want, given that you're operating, and working with many of them, right? I'm sure there are, stories of courage, resilience that you've come across, right? And there are many women, right, who are at that point, right? Whether to make a choice, right? Unfortunately, I think the personal complexities are such, right, that they're not really able to cross over. What will be that one word of advice from you, right? To them, so that they are out there to kind of really play as per the aspiration that they've had for the longest time, right? What will that be?
Yeah, absolutely. What I would say is that, I mean, like I would just point to a fact maybe, which is, with the growth of any movement, it isn't linear, right? It's not like, okay, you put an effort, you got it, you get it.
Right.
I mean, if you look at other social movements, like the African American experience in the US, there was just a lot of effort for a century. Between 1865 and 1965, until there was a major civil rights bill and movement, and all of these discriminatory practices.
Right.
I don't want to say came to an end, but definitely we made big progress there. So similarly, I think we're close to that hockey stick moment in India. That, like, there's been a lot of effort. There's still a lot of challenges, not denying that, but I think with a concerted effort, we can see a paradigm shift. Right. And we're starting to see that change, not only in women, but in men, with men kind of seeing their roles, not only professionally, but personally, kind of taking more ownership on the home front. So I think this is what cultural change looks like. It's hard, it's frustrating, but there are a lot of allies, and there are a lot of people working toward this. So don't ever feel like you're alone. And I think that's one message we're trying to put out, and really build this community. So that would be, I don't want to say advice, but that would be my something I'd like to share. So hopefully, if we keep focused on the vision, we will see that hockey stick transformation, that paradigm shift very soon.
Super. Rahul, it was a pleasure to have you with us. I mean, how I want this conversation to go on, and I think this is something that it's kind of cliched, right? I typically land up saying this, right? But how I want my conversations to go on. I mean, there are so many nuances. I mean, India is not an easy market. It's a fairly complicated market, right? Which makes it very, very interesting in many, many ways, right? And how I want this conversation to sort of go on, right? I think I think what you're doing at Florence is, I think, incredible, right? I think this is an extremely complicated market which is not necessarily very visible, through data points, right? There is a huge cultural baggage which it comes with, right? To tackle it, to model it in a to give right kind of credit, I think is just so much more difficult, right? And I think you are at it. You're motivated to change that, and I think clearly from the conversation, one thing I can sense is you have a thought process which is very holistic, right? It's more 360-degree rather than just being a lender in the process. And I think which is very critical to the entire mechanics. I think the community approach is very, very important. Rahul, it was a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much for taking the time out.
Thank you so much, Ashu. Enjoyed it.